Hello and welcome or welcome back to the Import Export Hub channel, everybody. Bogdan here, your biased host for the next couple of minutes. Thanks for joining in. And guys, keeping the usual pleasantries, allow me to cover the exports and the imports of Peru in 2023, along with the main drivers from each flow and, of course, the main trading partners. So first things first, I will start with Peru's exports, who in 2023 reached almost $64.4 billion, up almost 11% from 2022, as its main export driver, or slag and ash, so chapter 27, weighted quite a lot in Peru's export performance, as we have some $7.8 billion more exports with a whopping 42% share in the overall export, so quite resource dependent. But this is another story. Other chapters who made it in this top 10 list are also related to the resources sector, and we have precious or semi-precious metals, gold mostly, copper or zinc, so chapter 79, while edible fruit and nuts managed to take the third spot in Peru's overall exports with some $5.5 billion, almost $775 million more relative to 2022, where it ranked the fourth place. Now, relative to the compound annual growth rate for the last 5 years, we see that the overall exports registered a positive 7%, with only one chapter having registered a contraction. So I'm talking about residues and waste from the food industries. And as we can see here, we have a negative 7.2%. Drilling down on a year-on-year basis, things are more dynamic, it should be, and we have a 50-50 split, if you want, between positive and negative changes. And I will mention only the top performers relative to their absolute figures. And on the positive side, we have ores with almost $7.8 billion, the largest exported amount in this 2019-2023 timeframe. While on the negative side, we have chapter 27, mineral fuels and oils, with some $1.8 billion contraction relative to 2022. And one more thing that I would like to cover here is the cumulative value of the top 10 exports, which is quite concentrated. We have some 85%, a trademark, if you want, for the countries whose exports are mainly commodity driven. So guys, these were Peru's overall exports in 2023, and now I will take a look at the imports as well. And here we see that the overall value amounted to some $52.2 billion, which is some 13% lower than the 2022 figure, with mineral fuels driving Peru's imports. We have some $9.3 billion in absolute terms for 2023. Machinery and mechanical appliances follows, and the podium ends with chapter 87. Vehicles, basically, with some $4.8 billion worth of imports. And the top 10 list goes on with chapters like, plastics and articles thereof, cereals, and ends with miscellaneous chemical products. Chapter 38 with some $1 billion worth of imports. Relative to the compound annual growth rate, we see here that we have a positive 4.25%, with only one chapter having registered a contraction. I'm talking about articles of iron or steel, and we have some 0.7%, so quite insignificant. While on a year-on-year basis, we see that the mineral ores, plastics and iron and steel chapters shrunk quite a lot, all above the $1 billion mark, while chapters 84 and also 87 registered positive changes. But let's face it, guys, these are not at all impressive figures. And last thing before going into the details regarding the trading partners, we have here the overall balance of trade, which is positive. We have $12.2 billion, thanks, of course, to ore, slag, and ash exports. So chapter 26, which you don't see it here, it's much, much lower. And now, guys, with the overall exports and imports being briefly covered, let's see Peru's partners. And basically, in the next 10 sheets, I took the top 5 chapters from each flow in order to have a better view of, and from the export flow. The top performer, if you remember, is chapter 26, who in 2023 managed an impressive $7.8 billion increase relative to 2022, thanks to China's appetite. And the figures speak for themselves, really, as 73% of Peru's exports from this chapter are directed towards China, which of course can be problematic. But anyways, I'm not here to review Peru's policies, so I will continue my brief review of Peru's exports from this chapter. And we see that Japan is on the second spot with some $1.84 billion worth of exports, and South Korea ends this triad with almost $1.4 billion. As for the other partners from this top 10 list, we see, I don't know, Chile, Spain, or Germany, and ends here with Canada, who in 2023 managed to import from Peru some $193 million worth of ores. Unfortunately, almost 26% lower than the figure of 2022, which is also the year in which Canada imported the most from Peru, at least if we consider this 2019-2023 timeframe. And guys, if you're wondering what drove Peru's exports, well, it seems that copper ores and concentrates, so heading 2603, drove most of them both towards China and Spain. Jumping now to Peru's second export driver, we have here heading 71. So we are talking about precious metals with Canada, India, and Switzerland driving most of the gold demand from Peru. And the list goes on with countries like, I don't know, the United Arab Emirates, United Kingdom, or Turkey. And ends with France, who in 2023 managed to import some $7 million worth of goods from this heading. Now, relative to the year-on-year dynamics, we see that except for Switzerland, Brazil, and also France, who all had contractions, the rest of 7 had positive changes. The largest absolute one happening in relation to Canada, who in 2023 imported with some $500 million more. But my guess, and I repeat, this is my own personal opinion, is that India is going to catch up, and who knows, maybe in 2024 will surpass Canada as Peru's main export destination for precious metals. And guys, speaking of precious metals, gold seems to be the main export driver both towards Canada and the United Arab Emirates. So we are talking about heading 7108. Moving now to Peru's third largest export driver, we have here chapter 8. We are talking about edible fruit and nuts with a nice overall compound annual growth rate for these last 5 years in the range of 11%. And as we can all see, the overall exports amounted to almost $5.5 billion, with the United States, Netherlands, and Spain as the main destinations. We have some, I don't know, 65% overall for these three. From this particular chapter, of course, and then we see, I don't know, China or Mexico, and it ends here with South Korea, who in 2023 managed to import from Peru some $93.4 million worth of goods from this chapter. In what concerns the year-on-year dynamics, almost all the top 10 had positive growth, almost double-digit growth. The only black sheep, if you want, being South Korea, who had a 9% contraction, or almost $9.3 million, of course, if I were to put a dollar figure to the percentage. On the other hand, in what concerns the compound annual growth rate, again for these last 5 years, all these top 10 partners had positive figures. The most impressive one, if you ask me, being the growth shown by the United States and the Netherlands. As for the main export drivers, we have again a unique heading. This time we are talking about 0810. So basically we are talking about all the fresh fruits with berries as a suffix, which are driving the exports both towards the United States and the Netherlands. Jumping now, guys, to Peru's fourth export driver, we have one of the most boring chapters, chapter 27. If you're asking yourselves which is the other one, well, it's 99, so commodity is not elsewhere specified. But anyways, here we see that overall Peru managed to export some $4.4 billion with the United Kingdom, Brazil, and the United States as the main partners, which were followed in this top 10 list by others like, I don't know, Japan or China, and ends with France, to whom Peru managed to export almost $125 million worth of products. The top three rankings are much more volatile as opposed with the previous chapters, who are quite stable. And if you think about it, it makes sense really, as we're speaking about the commodity chain much more volatile as opposed to the ores one, where the demand is more stable and known in advance, being related to the manufacturing processes, whereas the petroleum commodity chains are much more price sensitive, being almost an ubiquitous commodity. But anyways, moving now to Peru's main export drivers from this particular heading, we see that petroleum drove most of the exports towards the United Kingdom, while petroleum oils, excluding the crude one, drove most of the exports towards Japan. So with this fourth main export driver being covered as well, allow me to cover the fifth and last one from this list, and we have here chapter 74, copper and articles thereof, with some $3.6 billion worth of exports, which is some 8.5% more relative to the previous year. And here, China is the main destination. The United States follows. And on the third spot, we have Italy with some $472 million. But of course, we have other destinations in this top 10 list, like, I don't know, Colombia, Mexico, or Venezuela, to whom Peru managed to export some $34 million worth of products from this particular chapter. In terms of compound annual growth rate, we have a positive 12.22%, thanks to the demand coming from China. And more recently, the United States, who managed an impressive leap in just a couple of years, from, I don't know, $158 million in 2019 to some $932 million in 2023, which is almost, I don't know, a six-fold increase. And for sure, this increase is correlated with the ramp up of semiconductor industry in the United States. So if you ask me, in the next couple of years, we will see much larger export figures towards the United States. As for the main drivers, we see that heading 7403, so copper refined and copper alloys, drove most of the exports towards Italy, while towards Ecuador we have heading 7409, so we are talking about copper wire. Moving now, guys, to the import flow. Here we see that chapter 27 drove most of Peru's imports in 2023, with some $6.15 billion worth of imports, with the United States, Ecuador, and Brazil as the main partners, followed in this top 10 list by others like, I don't know, Nigeria or Argentina, and ends here with Chile, from whom Peru imported some $70 million worth of mineral fuels. Now, if the compound annual growth rate for the last 5 years is positive, relative to the year-on-year dynamics, we have a negative change of 16%, which translates to some $1.8 billion, with the United States, Brazil, and Canada on the negative side, while Ecuador, Nigeria, and also Argentina were on the positive side with impressive year-on-year changes. As for the main import drivers, well, it seems that heading to 710 drove most of the imports from the United States, while from Nigeria we have crude petroleum, so heading to 709. Moving now, guys, to Peru's second import driver, we have here chapter 84, machinery and mechanical appliances, with some $67 billion worth of imports overall. And here we see that China, the United States, and Brazil are the three main partners, which were followed by others like, I don't know, Italy or Mexico, and ends with Chile, from whom Peru managed to import in 2023 some $119 million worth of products from this particular chapter. Now, relative to the year-on-year dynamics, we see that the imports expanded with 2%, or $134 million, even though the imports from China shrunk quite a lot. We have almost 10%, but were partially offset by the figures coming from Brazil, who managed to export with some $183 million more. As for the main import drivers, we see that PCs and laptops basically drove most of the imports from China, so heading 8471, while from Italy we have here dishwashing machines, so heading 8422. Jumping now, guys, to Peru's third largest import driver, we have here chapter 87. We are talking about vehicles basically, with some $4.8 billion imports overall, more or less 1% more than in 2022, with China, Brazil, and Argentina as the main partners, which were followed by others like, I don't know, Japan or India, and ends here with Germany. Now, relative to the year-on-year changes, we see that Peru's main import partner, so China, suffered the most, at least in absolute terms. And then we have South Korea with almost $93 million fewer imports from this country, so quite big contractions. While on the positive side, we see that the United States managed the largest absolute positive change, some $98 million, but still in the negative territory if we consider the compound annual growth rate for the last 5 years, where is sitting at a negative 2.31%. As for the main drivers, well, it seems that vehicles for the transport of goods drove most of the imports from Brazil, while from India we have vehicles for the transport of less than 10 persons. So we are talking about heading 8703. Moving now, guys, to Peru's fourth largest import driver, we have here chapter 85, electrical machinery and equipment, with some $4.19 billion worth of imports for 2023, which is some $464 million less than in 2022, with China, Vietnam, and the United States as the main partners, which were followed in this top 10 list by others like Brazil or Italy, and it ends here with Colombia, from which Peru managed to import in 2023 some $63.5 million worth of goods. Now, if the overall compound annual growth rate for the last 5 years is slightly positive, on a year-on-year basis, things are worrying, especially in what concerns the exports from China, or the imports from China towards Peru, who shrunk with some $393 million. But the same holds true for Vietnam or Mexico, even though the values are not as high as those of China. Now, relative to the main import drivers, it seems that smartphones drove most of the imports from Vietnam, while from Germany we have here boards, panels, consoles, and the like. So we are talking about heading 8537. And guys, moving now to Peru's fifth import driver, which is also the last chapter that I will cover. We have here chapter 39. We are talking about plastics and articles thereof, who registered the second largest absolute contraction, if I'm not mistaken, in terms of absolute figures after petroleum, so chapter 27. And basically we see that the imports in 2023 were $1 billion lower than those of 2022, with all the top 10 partners having registered negative changes. But China and the United States stand out the most, as we have almost $300 million contraction relative to the former, and some $221 million for the latter, which is a sign that something is changing in Peru. Now, in terms of trading partners, we see that China, the United States, and Brazil are the top three ones, and the top 10 list goes on with, I don't know, Colombia or Chile, and ends here with Germany, from which Peru managed to import in 2023 some $33 million worth of goods. As for the main drivers, well, it seems that polymers of ethylene in primary forms drove most of the imports from South Korea, while from Saudi Arabia we have polymers of propylene, again in primary forms, so we are talking about heading 3902. Whew. And guys, with this last chapter being covered as well, that's it for today. Thanks for watching. I hope you've liked it. Don't forget to hit those small vanity buttons below this video. And as usual, until next time, keep your business safe. Thanks.